I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're exploring a wonderful book. It's called Bensonhurst Sutra, Tales of an Italian-American Buddhist. It's written by a terrific author. Her name is Geraldine DeLuca. It is a deeply personal and beautifully written book that takes us on a journey through family, identity, and the search for spiritual meaning, blending the traditions of an Italian-American upbringing with the introspective depth of Buddhism. Get ready for an inspiring conversation and an inspiring book about self-discovery, resilience, and the wisdom that comes from embracing life's complexities. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Books to Life Marketing for helping us put her in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like her by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing her amazing book. The links are below this interview. And be sure to download the Spotlight Network TV app streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Geraldine, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, and it's very, very fitting. Your book is terrific. Growing up in Brooklyn,
Uh-huh.
1960s, 1970s, thereabouts, tell us a little bit about what life was like in Bensonhurst way back when.
Ooh, it was very conventional, lots of one family, two family houses, and I went to public schools, good, really good, wonderful public schools with good teachers. And basically, my community was either Italian or Irish
Yeah,
or European Jewish. So that
okay,
was my world. I don't think I knew any Protestants until I went to college. And it
exactly.
was lovely. It was a lovely way to grow up. I,
Yeah.
I I'm very fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I grew up in New Rochelle, New York, which isn't far from Bensonhurst. And the same thing, I only knew Irish people, Italian people, and some Jews. That's
Right,
it.
exactly.
That was our world back then. I guess we were the newer immigrants and
Right.
we were getting by. You were the favorite of the family, I understand from your book. Were
I
you the
think I
baby?
was. I was the baby. Yeah, yeah. And
The
I
baby
think
often is, right?
absolutely, you make the mistakes on the first one, and then the second one you go easy. And yeah, I think that's true. I think my mother was very young and really had no idea what she wanted to do with her life. And they told her, you get married and you become a housewife and you have babies. And
Yeah.
so it was hard for her.
Yeah.
And I think by the time she got to me, she sort of identified with me. She
Mhm.
kind of became a cheerleader for me, but I think it was hard. It was hard. It was hard on my sister.
Yeah. Did you have the extended family? I know it's very big in Italian families to have grandma and grandpa nearby. Sometimes they even live with you.
Yes.
Tell us what was up with your extended family.
Yes. Well, my father moved into Bensonhurst, and we had cousins in nearby neighborhoods, and he found houses for all of them. He was a
Wow.
lawyer. So he would say, I have a great house on 20th Avenue, and here's another one around the corner, and this one is, 2 stories. And so he brought all the family around, and he brought
Mm.
in his family too. My mother had a big family, and we all lived within walking distance of one another. And my grandmother lived around the corner, and she was very much loved. She had a lot of children, and they had a lot of children, so there were lots of grandchildren, and it
Mm.
was lovely.
That's wonderful. I mean, I
It
wish more
was.
kids today grew up surrounded by so many people who cared about them, were concerned
Absolutely.
about them, loved
Mhm.
them, and getting together for Christmases and Thanksgivings and Sunday night dinner. I mean,
Uh-huh.
all of this is wonderful memories. What are some of your fondest memories from growing up in that era?
Oh, I guess, visiting my grandmother on Easter and on Christmas and the enormous meals,
Hmm.
the Sunday meals and the holiday meals had so many courses. And it was lovely. It was fun. My uncles used to come over on the weekend, and my father would take out a chess set, and they would sit down and they would play chess, and they would have espresso, or they would have some cognac, and they would put on Johnny Mathis, not Johnny Mathis, actually Frank Sinatra, and they would listen to Frank Sinatra, and it was great. It was
That's
sweet.
great. Yeah, it's got
Yeah,
to be abundanza, a lot of food when you're in an
absolutely.
Italian family. As they used to say about Mama Leone's, we'll feed you like there's no tomorrow, right?
Exactly.
So when we
Exactly.
left your grandma's house, you felt the same way, that you've been fed like
Yeah,
there's no tomorrow, which is
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah.
Um, you don't usually equate traditional Italian households with Buddhism.
Right.
But how did you get hooked up into the whole Buddhism thing?
Oh boy, that's interesting. I loved the ritual of the Catholic Church, but
Hmm.
I was also scared of it. It's
Priests were tough back then. And they, yeah,
definitely,
I got smacked
definitely.
around by a bunch of priests growing up.
I know, and if
Yeah.
if you didn't go to church and if you didn't go to confession, you could go to hell. And so I moved away from it. And but I still had that yearning for for a spiritual practice that could be meaningful to me.
Hmm.
And when I got to college, well, when I started teaching actually at Brooklyn College, I ran into other people, other teachers, other colleagues who
Hmm.
were also interested in spirituality, and it just felt like it was more evolved to me.
Hmm.
And so that was interesting. I would sort of sit next to the ones who had a spiritual uh, side to them and just
Yeah.
wonder, that's a very smart person. Now, what is it that that person believes in?
Mm.
And then I took yoga. I went to started going to yoga. And if you go to yoga, you sit, you meditate.
Mhm.
And so I learned how to meditate.
Mm.
And then eventually I just started going to, small Buddhist groups in the neighborhood. And I met other Buddhists at the college. And we got together and we formed a little group of people. And we actually got a grant to establish a a Buddhist practice at the college and to bring it into our classes.
Mm.
And the more I learned, the more I liked. My
Very
feeling
cool.
about it is what's not to like? Essentially what Buddhism is saying is if you are kind to others, they will be kind to you.
Mm.
If you're mean to them, they will be mean to you. And the
Right.
reason that we're so unhappy most of the time is because we're taught that we have to be the best.
Mm.
That was one thing I certainly learned in college and in graduate school. You have to be the smartest because
Mm.
there's always somebody else who's going to try to be smarter than you. If you're a girl, you have to be the prettiest.
Mm.
And, Buddhism allowed me to get away from that. It said, the more you do that, the more you're going to suffer. Let it
Mm.
go. Just let it go. And that was just a great recognition for me.
Yeah.
Oh, I can let it go. I
Yeah.
can. It's allowed. And you become kinder to the people around you as time
Mm.
goes on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I feel like, there's a book that's written by a guy named Robert Wright. It's called Why Buddhism is True. And I feel
Mhm.
like Buddhism is true because what it says is if you're kind and loving, you're going to get that in return.
Mm.
So most of the time,
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Yeah.
So,
There's
but you got
always
a better chance if you start with being kind.
exactly, exactly. Definitely a good starting point. So education obviously is important to you. You mentioned your
Oh, yeah.
undergraduate studies, your graduate studies. Your career was in education and teaching, right?
Right, right.
Were you determined to have a career in part because your mother did not, and you saw that perhaps lacking in her life a little bit?
I mean, it was, and I know that now. I don't know that that's why I did it.
Yeah.
Um, it's sad. I think about her, about how many barriers she had. Her job was to be a housewife. If you went to
Right.
work, you were kind of, it was sort of a little bit shameful. My father thought of it and said, why does she have to go to work? Don't I make enough money? That was the
Right.
idea. But, I just loved school. I did well
Yeah.
in school. I got a lot of rewards for being a good student. I had friends who were bright and it just was lovely. I loved it.
Yeah.
So it was very easy to go on and to study. And my father wanted me to go to college. He wanted me to go to NYU because
Hmm.
he had wanted to go to NYU, but he couldn't because he didn't have enough money. And they
Mm.
wanted me to stay home so I could commute. But eventually I convinced them that I should live in a dorm, which to me was heaven on earth. And, and then I went to graduate school because it just seemed like the next thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, my roommates were going to graduate school.
Yeah.
So I went to
But
graduate school. And graduate school
amazing.
was very hard. It was hard, a lot of competition, and I was young. But, I sort of got myself a PhD.
That's
It was,
great. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
it
That's
was
wonderful.
nice. It was
Um,
fabulous.
yeah, it's very interesting. I grew up in an Irish Italian household. You grew up in an Italian household, and my folks were the same way. They were like, I could only go to a Catholic college, of course.
Okay, okay.
And
Wow.
they chose Fordham University for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I couldn't live there because we live in New Rochelle. Why would you need an apartment in the Bronx? You know what I mean? So it's funny. I mean, a lot of it was born out of practicality in those days too. They didn't see spending the extra money, that kind of stuff, when you have a room in our house, that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So
You have
it's
such a nice big closet. I
why do you want to
remember
leave this closet behind? Exactly.
exactly,
Exactly. What do
exactly.
you what do you hope readers take away from your book?
Oh, what do they take away from my book? It's interesting. It's part storytelling and it's part sort of my discussion of Buddhism. And there's also I'm hoping that politically, people recognize that it's becoming, not a good thing to say right now, but it's compassion for the
Mhm.
other, you
Yeah.
know. Um, what do I hope they take away from my book? I think a sense, that's a very good question. A sense of the importance of being kind to one another.
Hmm.
And also that, there's a certain amount of sorrow that's not going to be escaped. And
Yeah.
towards the end of the book, I read about the death of my father, my sister, and my mother, because they died in that order. And I, it's about death, which Buddhism is also about. And Buddhism is saying, look, we all die. Let's not make believe it's not going to happen. Let's not be ashamed of it. Let's not be afraid of it. It happens.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things I love about it as I'm getting older is that there's an embrace of it. People are not afraid to talk about,
Mm.
how it feels to get older, how it feels to get sick, how it feels to look at death.
Mm.
And that's been a great relief to me
Yeah.
because it's kind of we know it all happens, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's part of knowing how to live involves knowing how to let go of living, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough thing. Everybody lives with this secret fantasy that they're going to be the one person who lives forever. A lot of people harbor that. That's from a Vanilla Sky. That's Tom Cruise's
Uh-huh.
character says that he was
Uh-huh.
going to be the one person who
Right.
cheated old man time. And unfortunately, that can't be done. Did you enjoy writing the book? Did you learn anything about yourself while writing the book? What was it like
Yeah.
reliving some of those memories from the Bensonhurst days?
I loved writing the book.
Yeah.
I love writing, and usually I'll start writing and I think, okay, I'm writing. This is cool. I like what I'm writing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't even know what I'm writing, but I'm just writing it. And it sort
Mhm.
of came in hunks. And
Yeah.
then I would give it to my husband to read. And he's a very smart man, and I trust his judgment. And he would say to me, "This is very good. You should put it out there."
Mm.
And I guess I really got involved with it when I started taking courses in what they call Dharma and art over at a
Mhm.
place in Barre, Massachusetts. It's we got together and we meditated and then we shared our art and we wrote to each other. And so that kind of gave me a foundation. Somebody asked me the question, what is perception or what? And I thought, perception? What do you mean? I
Mm.
mean, things are what they are. And then I realized, not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think something is wonderful and it's terrible, or we think it's terrible and it's wonderful, and we really don't know.
Mm.
And part of the Buddhist view of life is let go of
Mm.
needing to know. Just let it be.
Yeah.
I have this friend who's she's more of a Buddhist than I am, and she says, you know, don't judge it.
Hmm.
That's another thing that's wonderful about it. Don't judge it, you know. So
Exactly.
I had a series of essays and stories and that I'd been writing over the last few years, and as I say, my husband kept saying to me, "Why don't you get it out there?"
Hmm.
And so I thought, all right, let me put it together. And I had a collection of essays on my shelf written by a woman who writes for the New Yorker. I can't think of her name, but I thought she did it. So maybe I'll follow her and I'll do something like that. I'll just create a collection of personal essays.
Yeah.
And some of them include a lot of story, a lot of narrative, and some of them are more sort of academic and so I put them together. And
Wonderful.
I put them I got 10 chapters in a coda. And I thought that's a good framework for it. And I had some paintings, so I thought, well, let me put my paintings in as well. Um, and there you go.
Great. Well, we're glad you did. We're glad you compiled all of that because it really is a delightful book. It's a very original work. There's really nothing else out there like it, which is
Uh-huh.
wonderful. The name of the book is Bensonhurst Sutra, Tales of an Italian-American Buddhist. It's
Uh-huh.
written by Geraldine DeLuca. It is a deeply personal and beautifully written book. She takes us on a journey through family, identity, and the search for spiritual meaning, blending the traditions of an Italian-American upbringing with the introspective depth of Buddhism. Get ready for an inspiring book about self-discovery, resilience, and the wisdom that comes from embracing life's complexities. Geraldine, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight and walking down memory lane with us a little bit.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I enjoyed talking to you.
My pleasure. I enjoyed speaking with you as well. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time until next time on Spotlight.